Hi guys, so welcome to another episode of Mind the Business Gap. Today I'm joined by somebody who's led transformation across various customer brands in the world, from British Airways to IHG to Caffè Nero to Disney, and he's led Caffè Nero through one of the most challenging times in history. He's had decades of experience in customer-centric businesses and transformation, and he might help answer the question how to transform businesses, but also by keeping people in the center. So please join your hands in welcoming Mr. Will Stratton-Morris, who is the Group Chief Business Development Officer of Caffè Nero. Welcome, Will.
Thank you.
How are you doing today?
Good. Great to be with you.
Yeah.
Maybe sound very old. Decades of experience.
No, even I have a decade of experience. So that we have that in common because hospitality. So I've been part of hotels. So I've been part of Taj and Hyatt. Anyway,
Okay, good.
Yeah. Anyway, so take us through your journey a little bit. Just maybe decades of experience in a minute, maybe.
Yes. I'm always reminded, this is probably useful for the listeners. I was reminded of that when I went for an interview for the first time after when I was at IHG.
Right.
I was invited to an interview in Dublin to be the CEO of an Irish-owned hotel group. And I hadn't done an interview for a long time. And the guy said that, just talk me through your CV.
Yeah.
So I started to, and I realized after about 10 minutes, I was boring myself. His eyes were glassy. So the simple answer to your question is, I mean, as you did very well in your introduction, I suppose I have essentially spent my career in blue chip, customer centric branded businesses.
Right.
From the beginning and right the way through. And kind of what I do, I suppose, is around transformation and change. I'm a marketeer by background, which is relatively unusual for a CEO.
Right.
Most CEOs tend to be from a finance background. So even when I've been appointed as CEOs, it tends to be because they are trying to reposition their brand. They're trying to grow or go into new markets or do something where they want somebody who's got a very strong kind of customer centric sort of lens. So I'm a kind of change guy, I suppose, for branded customer businesses. And that's the kind of common thread that runs through all of my career.
Okay. So you said mostly CEOs are finance based and not marketing based. Is that the trend generally?
Yeah, and I mean, I would think at least 3/4 of CEOs have come out of the finance function. And there's a reason for that, because obviously when you're a CEO, you need to be able to understand how to drive and create value and run a business. So obviously, background in accounting or finance more broadly is a very useful sort of area. And certainly it's a gap that I sought actively to fill, about 15, 20 years ago when I was going on the CEO journey. I went on a number of programs in, business schools and Harvard and this sort of stuff, just to kind of strengthen my kind of financial knowledge, because you need that.
Yeah.
But also I would argue that to be really effective, and of course some finance guys have this too, is you need to have a real appreciation of markets and consumers, because ultimately the businesses that succeed, whether they're customer facing businesses or whether they're, business to business enterprises, is you just need to understand fundamentally what is the value that your product or service brings, and how does it differ from the competition.
Yeah.
And that, in essence, requires a good understanding of the marketplace, a good understanding of how effective you are, whether you're building a product or whether you're developing a service.
Yeah.
Because if you understand that, and that's the starting point, then you can build a strategy off it, and then you can ultimately do all the things you have to do to build a successful sort of business.
Right.
But it does, sometimes people miss that. And particularly actually in the not-for-profit sector, same thing, not-for-profit. When I'm mentoring people that are running charities and stuff, you have to start and be quite cold-headed about it. So you want to do something worthy and you want to build that particular charitable enterprise, but same thing remains. If you're not doing something that somebody else isn't doing better or differently, then you'll end up probably not being that successful.
Right. So let's start from the very beginning. I think you were a management trainee in Marks and Spencer's when you initially started. What did that experience teach you?
Oh, I think yes, I did. So
because it's a rigorous experience, I've heard.
I think, and also I think M&S is one of the few blue chip companies that still runs the same program as it did right back then. And I went there before university. So I did my A levels, and then I went on the management training program. They do it at pre-university and post-university. And it's interesting because it was a long time ago, but it did have a lasting impact. I mean, I still think they're one of the greatest businesses that understands the value of really nurturing its talent, its people.
Yeah.
So not only is the front of house, if you like, always, very good, and obviously it's a more recently a fantastic recovery story under the current CEO, because they struggled for many years, particularly in the kind of retail and clothing space. They were always very good at food, but they really rebuilt their differentiation there as well. But for me, it was all around the kind of the importance of structure, organization, strong talent. They was recruited the best people, I think, whenever they could. And actually, little things like the way the staff restaurant, everyone talked about the staff restaurant, the fact there was a hairdresser, there was a chiropodist, there was all of these sort of services that certainly this is back in the late 80s, that the people didn't really expect that in a company. And they understood from the beginning, if you get it right, behind the scenes, and you build the loyalty of your people behind the scenes, then you can really, deliver a better experience for customers in the front of house. And it's very interesting about jumping right to the end to Caffè Nero. Different business, but very similar. So the founder of Caffè Nero, a guy called Jerry Ford, founded it 30 years ago. It's the same principle. It's very, very invested in the culture.
Right.
And we'll come on to talk about COVID, no doubt. And it was really that investment over decades in really making people feel they're part of a family that actually enabled them to recover, or us to recover the business very, very quickly.
Right.
People came back, even if they went home in COVID, back to different parts of the world, particularly in and around Eastern and Southern Europe. They wanted to come back to the Nero family. Yeah. So it's a very important time. So that's my biggest takeaway from M&S, basically.
Right. From M&S, we jump to the Royal Navy experience that you had.
That was a bit more opportunistic in the sense that I was, the truth is I was enjoying the work, but also enjoying having an income.
Right.
So I had my little car and everything. And suddenly I was about to be a student again.
Right.
And then I wandered past it. You still see them a bit, but not as many these days, but these kind of armed forces recruiting offices that used to be on high streets everywhere. And I saw this one, I had a big advert in the window that basically said, join the Navy, go to university, get paid, see the world, travel the world. Right. And I've way before M&S, I've always been passionate about travel. I worked in, my best friend's father ran a language school, and we used to travel around seeing people together, interrailing, all that stuff. So travel's always been in my DNA. So I thought, this is quite cool. So I ended up applying and getting in and spending those 3 years at university, when you would go back and join your ship during your vacations. This university here in Leeds and Leeds, as some people may know, it was always been affiliated to the Ark Royal, HMS Ark Royal, which was the flagship of the Navy at the time, the new ship. So we went to some great places. And then I joined the ship permanently after the university and spent about another 18 months, 2 years with them doing a world deployment. So what was the takeaway from that, apart from it was a lot of fun, in truth, that you can imagine, was that the leadership quality. I mean, obviously it's very topical in the challenging times that we're living in. Very interesting article, actually, I was reading in the Times this week about a guy that there was a scheme that they set up for the NHS where they took ex-military leaders into the NHS to help them, grow and improve. And his observations between what it was like working in the army and working in the NHS were really revealing. Because the thing about the forces, it's total commitment. It's a very kind of sort of rigorous, strong leadership environment, right. and you're lucky enough to work under people who are very good leaders in every sense, not only in terms of their clarity of thought, but the way that they look after their people and this sort of stuff. And I think for me, that was what gave me my foundations of my own leadership style. Really came through observing others.
Yeah, so it helped you with your leadership and decision making as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So you spent a decade at British Airways, working in marketing and sales across there. And British Airways in those years was going through an enormous change, say the privatization era and the global aviation competition which was going on.
Yeah.
So what was it like being inside that transformation?
Well, you're right. It was a remarkably, important time for the national carrier. I went that because whilst I love the travel side of the Navy, and I love the commercial business side of M&S, and the problem in the forces then is probably similar but not as bad now, is that you didn't get promoted on merit for what felt like a long time. I think I would have had to wait till I was like 32 or something, which of course now feels incredibly young, but at the time felt incredibly old. Yeah. So I saw the opportunity to move into something which was going to offer travel, obviously an airline, and also business. It was, again, for me, was again a very important learning ground. So BA was the first airline, people may not know this now, but that actually brought kind of contemporary marketing branding techniques into the service sector.
Okay.
So branding, as we would know it now, branding, FMCG branding, Mars, Cadbury, etc., Procter & Gamble, that was very much a consumer goods space. So when you flew on an airline, you flew like, you just got onto one of the cabins, economy, business, first, whatever. British Airways started to really build a brand around each of the cabins.
Right.
And so in fact, the guy that was running brand management, a guy called Mike Batt, who came from Mars, was amazing. And I did the graduate program, and then I just went into that sort of area. And so I learned a lot about branding. And the other thing I learned a lot about, which actually, again, was very new, but now, of course, is everywhere, was loyalty marketing, CRM marketing, because they were the first carrier, or one of the first carriers, to launch the Executive Club, which, of course, is until literally the last year or so, has been called the Executive Club over the last 30, whatever it is, years.
Okay.
And I learned a lot about what was then called relationship marketing, but the essence of how do you get customers to remain loyal to you? What is it in addition to just the experience that you have to offer to sort of make them sticky?
How do you make customers remain loyal to you?
Well, in essence, actually, it's not. I mean, it's like with many things, it's the core isn't that difficult, but the execution is quite tricky.
Right.
In essence, you have to have a really great product. So I always say to people, it's no point building an amazing loyalty program if your core experience is not consistently good. And to be fair, in the airline space, or in any people-based space, that's quite difficult, because if when you're producing Mars bars, as long as you've got the machinery set up properly, they come out exactly the same, right? Okay. When you have a service experience in a restaurant, in a bar, in a Caffè Nero, on a British Airways flight or any other, they can be, and we all know they can be a bit variable. So you have to first and foremost make sure that your core product is as consistent as possible.
Right. And
we can talk a lot about how you do that with people. It's a very much more nuanced thing, of course. But then you've got to add what are the extras that are going to make them sticky. And of course, in the airline space, Avios, Air Miles, as it was used to be called, has been the principal vehicle. Combination of reward, if you like, whatever the reward is. In Caffè Nero, it's free coffee after every 10 cups, as many of the guys will know, because there's many Caffè Neros in Leeds. Yeah. That is the largest city in the country in density terms for Caffè Nero. So a bit of combination of loyalty. And another really interesting area is status, which is something which is very difficult to research. Because if I say to you, Rory, how important is it for you to be given a gold card? And most people will say to you, not important at all. Right. I mean, I'm a really nice sort of like democratic guy. I don't care about status. But then the reality is, people,
it does matter.
It does a lot, and particularly the more loyal you are. Yeah. So you have to be quite subtle with that. I mean, and much more so today than you would 20 years ago. Right. In the old days, everybody slapped the gold card on their briefcase and proudly walked around saying, hey, look at me, I'm really important. Right. I think it's a little less, it's a little bit anachronistic for today. I think people are a bit more subtle, but at the same time, it is important recognition, and I think it's depending on as a brand, depending on the value that that customer cohort brings to you, you've got to invest the right level of combination of reward and status around them to keep them loyal and keeping that kind of revenue coming in.
Right. Well, status does matter, definitely, because I had when I was back in Hyatt, so I had a guest who had an American Express card that was Black American Express.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So we all know how valuable that is. Anyway, so from moving to hotel.
I never had one of them, by the way, sadly. I don't think I will now either. I mean, it's my apex.
So I think looking at that, maybe I realized someday maybe I should have one. But I asked him this, and he said, he gave me a simple answer. He said, well, I can buy a lot of things from that. So he gave a humble answer, but I'm sure he could buy the whole hotel with that.
Probably right.
Yeah. So you repositioned Disney into a multi-day resort destination, right?
I mean, that sounds like the team.
Right.
I mean, I was leading the European and the branding team in Disney for Disneyland Paris. And that was the principal mission of the group. Those of you, people may have been to Disneyland Paris, which opened in 1992. Right. And then I was there 10 years later, roughly about 2000 onwards. And then we would open the second part. And that was, as you said, the real strategy behind that was a lot of people would go to Disney for a day trip on the way going somewhere else. Yeah. And we were trying to get people to stay, ideally for 2 or 3 nights. For obvious reasons, so obviously the longer you stay, the more you spend. And so that you had to have a wider proposition, more products. And so we opened the Walt Disney Studios park, and then of course the critical thing you can do whatever as ever, you can build the product, but you've got to communicate it to the various parts of the world, and in our case, Europe, to get people to understand it and why they should stay. So that was really interesting. Again, Disney is a brilliant company, a remarkable brand, obviously, very multifaceted, many different sort of ways into the customer life. And more recent years, particularly obviously in media and Disney Channel and all the rest of it, and now subscription services. So it's always tried to work across multiple channels, and like I learned a lot about that in my Disney years. It wasn't just what we did in the park. Right. The best thing was to get a kind of joint relationship with the guys in the stores or the guys on the music front, and so you could try and sort of spread the brand across multiple channels, like an omni-channel approach, because you've got a much better net output for everybody. The more the customers were vested into the Disney kind of universe, right, the more loyal they'd be, and the more likely we would achieve our goals of getting people to stay longer.
Okay. From Disney, then it was time for Caffè Nero. So you took over Caffè Nero. Was that?
No, and then I went to IHG Hotel Group.
Went to IHG. Okay. Mm-hmm. So IHG. So IHG was more of, that time, I think there were about 6,900 hotels that time. And so IHG, and it was a publicly listed company. And there were various segments, right? There are different segments to IHG. There's luxury, there's premium as well. So there's Holiday Inn, there's Crown Plaza, there's I think the most luxurious was Regent, if I'm not wrong. Mm-hmm. Six Senses and Regent. So,
that is now. Those brands weren't there.
How did you keep that brand identity in check?
Well, the most interesting thing about IHG, certainly in the decade that I was associated with them, is that they really. This is a really great case study, actually. How they completely repositioned their company. So if you think about the turn of the century, the millennium, they were effectively a hotel owner. They owned lots of assets, so they were very asset rich. Had probably billions of pounds of assets under management, and they managed those hotels with their own people, and essentially had to be really good at that kind of world of real estate investment. And over the course of that time, under the leadership of the group CEO Andy Coslet, they effectively went from being an asset owner to being a franchisor. Yeah. And they basically were just continually selling off the assets, which obviously generates lots of cash, but critically then puts them in a position where they're much more what we term asset light. So they were able to actually invest and become essentially a branding company. And for me, what was interesting, and the timing of that was great, is because obviously with a background in branding and marketing and the company shifting, they were willing to take a punt on and put me from my natural space of commercial and marketing into actually running the UK business. Okay. So I could do that switch into general management and become on the CEO path. So that's the journey of that's the significance, I think, of IHG. Yes, they had a portfolio of multiple brands, like you said. I mean, like many businesses do. I mean, obviously, and including the ones that you work for, yes. But they all have way more brands than they had, 15 years ago. Right. And that's the criticality of that is really effective brand management. So, you've got to be really clear about what does each brand stand for. You can seek to market them as a portfolio, and most of the hotel groups, of course, have loyalty programs like IHG Rewards or Hilton Honors or whatever, or Marriott's equivalent, where they try to sort of give you choices for your different sort of needs. But at the same time, each brand has to have a separate kind of brand team or manager and team that actually really build its own depth and strength. Right. Otherwise, it becomes a kind of a bit of a blur, right? And that's okay to an extent, because sometimes people say, all I care about really is getting the points, so when I'm traveling on business, so I can redeem them with my family. But long term, that's not a very sustainable proposition. The other interesting thing about that, I think it's really important from a learning point of view, is you see the flip side of having all those brand managers is that they build very clear personas for their typical target customer. And they tend to believe that the customers that stay in InterContinental or the customers that stay in Holiday Inn or whatever, are completely loyal to their brand. And the truth is, what most customers are like is that it all depends on need state. If you have that kind of range of offer, less so with coffee, because obviously there's only one. Well, there's only a coffee shop. But in the hotel group, so I used to get crazy with them because they'd say, well, the InterContinental customer wants this, and this, and then the whole day. And I'd say to the guys, look at the data. The data tells you very clearly that, and I'm a good example of that. When I'm going away with my wife, I want to go upscale. I'm willing to spend some money and stay somewhere really nice and go to a nice restaurant. I have 4 kids. When I'm going away with my 4 kids, and particularly I'm traveling on the route, I'm going to go to the cheapest hotel possible. Yeah, I make sure it's an IHG one to get my points. Right. So I am effectively a Holiday Inn Express customer, and an InterContinental customer. And the truth is, the trick is that you, as I said before, you do need to keep the brand integrity strong, but you do need to understand that customers will move across your portfolio depending on their particular need state. Right. And that getting that established as a kind of way of thinking took some time. But I think I played my part in trying to get the company to operate in that way.
But that is a challenge, an InterContinental hotel guest going to Holiday Inn Express sometimes it wants the same kind of service also.
Sometimes, but most people are pretty, I always think they're pretty sharp, right? If they're paying a third of the rate for the room.
Right.
And also this is again where the loyalty side comes in, because I think they're doing really well, actually. I have to give it to them, and there's nothing to do with me. It's after my time, but they've really built their recognition program, the IHG Awards program, into a really massive machine. And so even because they recognize your status, if you're a regular stayer, then I was amazed. Is to get back to my earlier points about kind of getting people to do things consistently. I have to say, and it's the truth. In all the hundreds, say IHG hotels I've been in the last year or so, every time they say, they look at I'm Diamond Elite because I travel a lot. Thank you, Mr. Stratton-Morris, for your loyalty. And whether I'm staying in the cheapest one or I'm staying in the Six Senses, they're really good at that. And I think that's the way to sort of do it. People accept they're going to get a different physical product when they're staying in a small hotel, but they want to be nevertheless recognized. So it can be done, but it's not easy, and it takes a lot of training and effort to do it.
Right. So before we dwell into Caffè Nero, I have a short rapid fire round for you. Set, right? Yeah. So whatever comes to mind. 3 non-negotiables in the hospitality industry.
Service excellence, resilience, and passion.
Right. I agree. Your go-to order at Caffè Nero?
Flat white.
And for food?
I actually like the classic mozzarella and tomato panini.
Right. Your favorite city to live in?
Oh, that's a difficult question. I've lucky enough to live in Rome, lived in Paris, lived in London. I think probably Paris as a city.
Probably Paris. If you could have dinner with any famous figure, who would it be?
Alive or dead?
Alive or dead.
That's big. I would have liked to have, this is a ridiculous thing to say in a way, but I would have liked to have had dinner with Jesus.
Okay.
Given the impact of Christianity over the 2,000 years. And a living figure, Tony Blair.
Tony Blair.
I think he's a really interesting person.
Yeah, I've heard really good things about him. So
controversial to some people because they were at war, but for me, there's somebody who, this is not really the subject of the podcast, but somebody who was a Blairite sort of voter, always saw this as a central sort of center left, center right person. I find it really frustrating that I'm confronted with the choices which, to my mind, way too far to the left or way too far to the right. And I'm
more of a centrist approach.
That centrist, really strong, pragmatic, central person. I did see him a few times live, and he's just brilliant intellectually as well. But yeah, he's my living person.
Right. So both of your activities, running or skiing, if you could only focus on one for the rest of your life?
Probably running, because you can do it for longer and you can do it anywhere.
Right.
Skiing requires a lot of kit.
Yeah.
But you're right, they are my favourite 2 sports.
Right. Your favourite movie?
Oh gosh. I probably still is, obviously a bit sad, but I still probably think it's Pretty Woman.
Pretty Woman. Julia Roberts.
Yeah, because it's just such a, I mean, my daughter and I laugh about it. We probably recite every single line in the film, but it does give you that lift when you're having a bit of a
same. Richard Gere, Julia Roberts, wonderful movie.
Yeah, well, a bit dated, I'm afraid, for the audience probably, but
I've seen it, so I'm not that dated.
Still won't see.
Yeah, it is.
It's so amazing. And also, there's another thing that's so fantastic for your generation is there's so much amazing content on stream content. Some of the series that I was just watching, ironically, Tehran. You've all watched Tehran. I mean, it obviously started before the current crisis, but it was so brilliant and so interesting. And what's so interesting about it is it's not like the Iranians are all baddies at all. On the contrary, you fall in love with the characters on both sides of the divide. But there's as much great content streamed as movies, I think, these days.
Of course. So, Will, is the customer always right?
I know not necessarily right, but I think that we do have a duty in the service industry to take on feedback.
Yeah.
In an ideal world, customers have a duty to give feedback in a certain. I give quite a lot of feedback. Right. It drives my wife crazy. She says to me, "You're going to give feedback, and I'm not going to be here." She walks away from the test. But I know how important feedback is. Really, really is. And I think that you can deliver it. But of course, not everyone does give feedback in a structured way. And therefore, you can get to this sort of, when in Nero, for example, which is interesting because the thing about coffee houses, unlike, say, a restaurant or a hotel, is that people that when you think about your own lives, you're generally going in and you want to grab something, right? Speed. So you're under a lot of pressure. It's a very difficult job being a barista because you've got to do everything really quick.
Right.
And people can get quite rude quite quickly. And or they say that X or Y isn't good. And our policy is if the customer doesn't like the drink, make a fresh one. Don't get into any. You're not there to protect the company by negotiating or arguing with the customer. But it's quite hard on a human level to do that.
Right.
So are they always right? Not necessarily, but that doesn't mean to say that you need to tell them they're not right.
Yeah.
Your job is to sort of keep it calm and move it on.
Right. So one habit that made the biggest difference in your career?
Can I give two? Because I think
Sure.
two quite important. One was very early on in the Navy. I wasn't particularly sporty as school. I mean, I wasn't like, not like my sons who were super sporty. I wasn't like that. But I had a friend who got me into running quite early. And that definitely has been and generally outdoor activities. And that, I think when you have a very high pressurized work life and things, exercise and doing it early. I hate to say this in the student environment, guys. I was saying to somebody actually at work only yesterday, they were frustrated because they kept they were going to go for the gym after work. In my experience, 9 times out of 10 never happens because something meeting runs on. You've got to get up a bit earlier, which is difficult, particularly when you're a student, but it's really important to put it in. So that's probably one. And the other thing, interestingly, I went on to a leadership seminar a few, 20 years ago, maybe. And it was this top general it was the head of NATO who was speaking, and they were like asking him questions and stuff. And somebody asked him, so what is the most important sort of life lesson for you? And we thought he'd say something like, well, getting a really great plan and strategy and battle action. And he said, it's very easy. Read every day. Read every day. And I was like many people who does enjoy reading, but I would read probably on holiday.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go to bed and just read a couple of pages. Right. But I did after that. And then, of course, Kindle's got going. And I now, however late it is, even though I only read for like 2 minutes, but obviously sometimes you read a lot longer. And it's been it's like someone giving me a gift.
Yeah.
It's been so fantastic. So exercise and reading. But not reading business books and, obviously people read what they want, right? But I think to read fiction of various forms is because you want to get your brain into a different place. Right. In essence.
Interesting. So which is your favorite book then?
Oh, that really is difficult. I mean, there's so many. I'm not going to give you a favorite, but there are so many brilliant books.
So if you had to recommend me a book, see, we've been talking for a while now. So if you had to recommend me a book and if you want me to read, because I read fiction. I'm into murder mysteries more. I'm the thriller.
Yeah. No, I like really.
So John Grisham, Jeffrey Archer.
Yeah, and all of the obviously who wrote Munich, Richard Harris books and all those sort of books. I like well-written books as a whole. I've just read an amazing book, which is Tom Holland. He probably many people know because obviously the Rest is History podcast. I really like him and Dominic Holland. The guy who he does it with. But he's written a book called Dominion, which is actually the history of Western civilization. But his essence is that, and I am a Christian, so it's kind of relevant. But it's not a book about Christianity per se. It's a book about how did we evolve as a society over the last 2 millennia. And I don't think he's a Christian either. So it's much a historical thing. It's just the way it's so compelling and so interesting to be. I love books that can be both. That's not a fictional book. That's a non-fiction book, actually. Having said recommending fiction, but because he writes in a very compelling way, it feels a lot. I mean, when I say that non-fiction, don't try and read something really dry. You read something you're interested in, and that was a great book. Quite long, but I think really, really interesting on many, many levels.
Right. Okay. So, biggest challenge in the hospitality and retail industry today? What do you think?
Cost. Cost. The truth is, it makes it very difficult to operate in a way, well, basically, it makes it very difficult to employ as many people as you want to employ. And I do think it's difficult. And I don't say that in a political way. I really don't, because I'm not, as I said before, I'm not ever sort of thought of myself as a hugely political person. But I do believe in talent, developing young people. I do a lot of mentoring. And I believe in creating as many job opportunities as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And if you're willing to work hard, I mean, there's obviously, it's a much bigger debate, I guess, because a lot of reasons some people can't. But I think our job as leaders is to create the environment where there's as much work opportunity as possible. And it doesn't really help when you get getting all of these other things chucked over the fence.
Right.
They're real thought out. So that's the biggest challenge at the moment. Not finding people, it's not a great people, but being able to afford to have as many people as you'd like to have.
I think that is happening across all over the world now. What do you think a food trend these days? What is trending when it comes to?
I'm not really a food expert. I was really privileged in Nero to work with some fantastic people on food, but I learned quite a lot about it.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the most interesting trends, and this is more a beverage than the food, but it's certainly really interesting as from a business point of view, is that you do a lot of work with any business, obviously trying to build your 3-year plan or your 5-year plan and your annual budget and all of this stuff, because you have to. Otherwise, you might make a mistake and lose money, and which results in losing jobs and everything else. So, and you think you've got to do a lot of research and mapping, and one thing we completely missed actually really was the phenomenon that is matcha. So last summer, when Caffè Nero, matcha had been around for a while, it's not completely new, but it became really mainstream quite quickly. And we Caffè Nero developed 2 matcha variants. One was a vanilla matcha, and one was a strawberry milkshake or something, or strawberry cheesecake or something like that. Anyway, 2 variants. And it's a lot of influencers, social influencers. Even before we put the posters up, we served them for like a week or so in the stores before we start advertising it to get the staff used to making them. And some influencers, tasted it, loved it, and went crazy. And literally, it became about a phenomenon. I think we predicted something like about 15,000 a week, and we were sort of selling 150,000 almost from day one, and then we were like doing 300,000. So it completely blew everything out of the window. So there's obviously what's the trend behind that. I think is, there is a really interesting trend around novelty and innovation. Some often referred to as the kind of the sort of Instagrammable sort of consumption piece. People like to, particularly sort of Gen Zs, like to sort of share their experiences, obviously through TikTok and all the other kind of platforms. So there's a lot of, tapping into that is really important. And sometimes you tap into it inadvertently, because we didn't think we were going to tap into it as much as we did. So on the food front, the other really interesting food trend, certainly in the coffee house space, and this is really interesting. So coming out of COVID, from a cost of living was obviously, as it is not going to be again now, I guess, another massive focus given all the problems on oil price and stuff in the last week or so. And so we thought, our interpretation of that, therefore we've got to make things cheaper. So we tried to push really, we were shrinking things. We were sort of like making the cheesecake a little bit smaller. Therefore we could charge 10 pence less or whatever. And a lot of products got shrunk in order to what we thought was the right thing to make them more affordable in a cost of living crisis.
Did that work?
No, because what really happens is that people essentially are, if you think about it on a very basic level, if you're trying to get the cheapest coffee or cake possible, then you go to the supermarket, right? Or you make it at home. So when they're coming into a Caffè Nero, there's a degree of treating going on, right? It's a little indulgence. Yeah. For many, it's a daily indulgence because they want to have their latte or whatever they want to have. And so what they expect, though, if you're charging me £3 for a piece of cake, then it needs to be good and big and substantial. And therefore, I'd much rather you charge me £3, that was great, than charge me £2.70 and it looks really mean. And we had this concept called shrinkflation. So I'm talking about the whole of the industry. We weren't unique in this. So we started to get bolder again, put it on its head. We introduced something called the Marizzo bun. I can probably say all this because, guys, you can see it all around the city. Bigger buns, bigger things again, less range, bigger. Price is relatively, high if you think compared to what you could bake it for at home, but it worked much better.
Right.
I think that's really interesting how consumers think, and then that's probably because obviously you think about as you save money, you probably stop eating out quite as often, slightly cheaper restaurant, less frequently. Luckily for coffee, it's kind of at the bottom of the sacrifice chain. Yeah. At most, somebody might cut back on how many times they go in a week or something. So food needs to be compelling visually, so you can share it in various different forms of media. It needs to be great, and don't skimp to save silly bits of money. Take a bit of butter out of this or that. Make it taste delicious, and people will stay loyal to you.
Absolutely right.
Is our learning. I'm not saying that's our learning. Others might not agree with that, but it was an interesting reality in our world.
Yeah. So taking you back to COVID times, I think that time was your stint in Caffè Nero. Then you
So So
what were the challenges you were facing then? Because we're talking about a cafe. We're talking about a cafe during a pandemic, right?
Yeah.
So, what were the challenges? Biggest challenge? Because I read an article also about you regarding that, and there was certain challenges that you had mentioned. So,
well, yeah. I'm hoping I say the same things as in the article.
Yeah.
There were huge challenges. I mean, obviously, let's caveat it with the challenges that we were facing in business were not the same as the personal challenges that people faced, and in many tragic circumstances, lost loved ones. So I don't want to put it into perspective. It's all kind of relative. But the big issue for us, as you said, the biggest problem for anybody in hospitality was the vast majority we were closed, right? So suddenly put all the emphasis on the takeaway. You could do takeaway, you could do click and collect, and in fact, we did a number of things as a consequence of COVID, many of which we were forced to do, we wouldn't have necessarily chosen to do. So I'll give you some examples. One of the things that we did, I think I've told this story to previous MBA students here at Leeds. So we were talking about doing delivery, as in Deliveroo and Just Eat and things, Uber Eats, for years before COVID. I mean, a couple of years at least. We would have the conversation around the board table, and we really ought to do delivery. Everyone's doing, no, because delivery is going to be the coffee. Who wants to order coffee at home?
Cold coffee.
Yeah, coffee will be cold. The coffee, the foam will go flat. All of this stuff. So we convinced ourselves that we should never do it, and it would have caused a problem in the store because the driver would come in and jump the queue, and all of it. We were very good actually at scenarioizing all the reasons not to do anything. But of course, COVID meant we had to do it. We did it, and you know what? It was without any issues. Because two really important things. One is customers are not stupid, right? They understand that the coffee that's going to be brought to them in bed when they're, on their iPad looking at the news or whatever, is not going to taste the same as the one that actually was made by the barista fresh.
Right.
As long as it tastes pretty good and pretty similar, they're fine. And the other interesting trend is that convenience trumps everything. Sad reality is most of us, I know I am pretty lazy when it comes to it, right? So giving me something that is going to enable me not to have to get up and go down into the village or the town and buy a coffee was really popular. So I think what we learned is it was a completely incremental business stream. Click and collect, same thing. How will that work? Oh my God, that'll cause all the problem. No, it doesn't. It was fine. So there was lots of different, I call them the positives in a sense, because we were made to think differently, and we were a much better company actually as a consequence of what we went through. But on the flip side, of course, it was no one's underestimated the pain and the loss of income and jobs for the short term. But as I said at the beginning of the podcast, the great thing is that the strength of the culture brought people back. So it took us a good 18 months, 2 years to rebuild the business. But now when you look across the cafes, you see very few what we call red t-shirts. Red t-shirts are people under training. Yeah. And the first 18 months post-COVID, there was lots and lots of turnover. Now it's stable again, and we've recovered it. Right. But it was, for me, one of the most difficult parts of certainly my career than most of us, I think, we've ever had to go through.
But what quality changes did you do basically to ensure that the online delivery model worked when you were?
You just have to. I think you start again to see your business as a bit more multi-channel, really.
Yeah.
But we also did something else that was really important as a consequence of COVID, or coming out of COVID. We did quite a lot of data. It gave you time. They had a bit more time because obviously you weren't trading as much. So there's more time to think about the business and what was important. And one of the things that the guys did was really clever. They did some data correlation between the stores that had the highest customer scores. So we have a digital app. You hopefully you've got. Yeah. We have very high app penetration, like 75% of people that buy, shop with us in Leeds are on the app. So it's by far the most important channel. Anyway, we looked at the scores they gave, and with the stores that were growing fastest. So the higher the customer service score, or the higher the number of 5 out of 5s that were given, or they're about above 90%, the best growth in the store. And I know it's a very intuitive sort of assumption, i.e. give better service and you'll get more loyal customers. The strength of the correlation was unbelievable. So we actually launched a different incentive scheme for the staff. So that if they get over 90%, then they get extra money in their pay packet. So this is back to that point about how do you get consistency of delivery. Yeah. So every time they're serving a customer, hopefully they're thinking, not only do I want to give great service, because many of them, of course, want to naturally, but I really, really want to, because if I get my score up to that level, I'm going to get extra money at the end of the month. So it really, and we never did that before.
Yeah.
And so that was and that's been quite transformational. That strategy and our partnership strategy with other partners, third parties we work with, have been the big sort of, drivers of outperformance for the Caffè Nero group.
Right. Okay. So all your roles had an element of problem solving and transformation. What is your problem solving approach? Because I can see all your roles have a transformation.
Yeah, I think most roles, certainly senior leadership roles, do. I don't think there's anything particularly unique about my career in that respect. I think the way I answer that question is going to, people often say, so when do you approach each company differently? And the truth is, I don't really. What I try to do when I go into a new business is spend quite a prolonged period of time just observing and listening. As long as that you can. I mean, the trouble is the pressure on you becomes very quick to start acting.
Yeah.
But as long as you can protect some time to think. I mean, in fact, to be fair to Jerry, the owner of Nero, the founder of Nero, he's really obsessed about this. He said to me, you can't speak for the first 3 months, which is very difficult when you're a senior person. You just got to listen. But it's the same point. If you really need to get under the skin of the business. In my case, at Nero, one of the things I did, which hadn't been a policy before, is I actually trained to be a proper barista. We said everybody goes to work in the store for a few days, but I kept at it to get my black T-shirt. And that was hugely important, because the transformation of a company begins, right at the beginning of a deep understanding what you're really about. As I said at the beginning, what's different and better about what we do than the next person in the street. And the only way you can understand that and how to do it is to really do the job of the people who are doing the frontline experience. Sure. So for me, it was the best investment at the time, because I understood what it meant to work behind a bar in a Caffè Nero. So when people were bringing me papers in years to come about doing this and adding that and change, I was saying, no, that's way too complicated. No, I want time to do that. I can speak from experience about
exactly how much time will it take.
Yeah, what they're doing. Yeah. But the other really important thing is, as a leader, is it gives you huge credibility with the staff. Because if you've done it, I did the same thing at IHG in the hotels. If you've been to all these hotels and walked around the corridors and looked at the chip paintwork or talked to housekeeping, done a shift on housekeeping, put your arm around a U-bend of a toilet and all the rest of it, if you've done all those things, then you, apart from understanding the reality, you actually, or being more empathetic to the people, you're much more credible. So the answer to your question is quite a long-winded answer, but is that you spend a lot of time really getting under the skin of the organisation and the business, doing the job as much as you can, and then you start to obviously build a kind of mind map of what are the issues. You understand what your positioning is as a brand. You understand where you think you're strong, where you think you're weak, and then I move towards where I create a kind of a strategy, which tries to, at a very simple top line level, create a framework of direction that has a vision and a purpose and a financial goal, and it has the kind of buckets of strategic focus, and talks about being underpinned by the culture. I've used this framework, but I've discussed it here, and I'll probably discuss it later at the session with the students. It's a very useful kind of approach, because once you've built the plan and the strategy, then of course you can set about getting the right people around you to execute it.
Okay.
And depending on the organization that you're in, that sometimes requires some changing out of some people. Some of the roles we haven't talked about SSE. I went to work for an energy company for 5 years, mainly because on a personal level, I wanted to stop traveling. I was doing too much traveling. This is before Nero. And in that leadership team, there really was a diversity issue in that company. We had some really super people, but I remember doing one of those Forum 100 meetings with the top 100 people in the team. And I looked at the team I had inherited, and they all look like me. They were all basically like, white, sort of early middle-aged men, men in their 40s, whatever. And I said, which is ironic, because any time I've ever got accused of sexism was by a bloke, I said, this isn't because you're not good, but you can't, if you don't have, the great thing about diversity, which is not of my pet passions, is that it doesn't need to have artificial targets being set and abstract. It really doesn't, because anybody with any intelligence knows that you need a diverse team to actually get a better outcome. Right. And most customer bases, are diverse. So if I have only got a bunch of blokes sitting there thinking about the problem, then I'm going to get a very narrow response. So I think it's really important to get diversity of gender. It's very important to get diversity of cultural experience or ethnicity if possible. because you just get a better kind of outcome.
Different perspectives also
perspectives and businesses need different perspectives. So often you do have to change the leadership group to get that, because that's the way you're going to be successful. And then you need to be really, really good at execution, and you need really great operators who are very thorough and to do it. And that's basically the transformation roadmap isn't that different from the running an effective business roadmap. Yeah. Often it does require quite a lot of change, which often gets labeled as transformation. But I think I found, anyway, in my experience, I've had a pretty consistent approach to the challenges, company by company, and I'm pleased to say they've been pretty consistently effective.
Right. So from since you mentioned SSC and Iduna also you work for, right? So what from the energy transition industry, what can Caffè Nero learn from them?
That's interesting. I mean, my world is obviously at my career stage, at a later career stage, is moving from executive leadership to non-executive leadership. So I'm a non-executive. I chair that board, but I've been doing it for about 4 years. So I chose to do the role because I'm quite passionate about sustainability and the kind of the energy transition that we need to make as a world, not as a country. So it was a nice chance to be a part of that. I think the learnings between the two have been, they've been quite commercial in truth. So if you think about electric vehicle charging, most people are charging now with ultra fast chargers in about 20 minutes. When you're sitting waiting to charge your car for 20 minutes, what do you want to do? Have a coffee. So there's obviously natural partnerships, and Iduna actually works quite heavily not with Nero. We have got one, but mainly with Starbucks and other people, and that's quite exciting, I think. And then but on the flip side, I think all businesses in the last decade have become much more. Obviously, there's a kind of obligation from an ESG point of view, but I think it's more to do with our people. The generation of leaders are more sort of driven by the importance of those issues than perhaps my generation was. And we've learned, and I think, so one of the things we've done with Nero, we now have all of our energy coming from Octopus. It's all green energy. So we have that as a kind of policy across our entire estate, across all 800 stores across the UK. And that, I think, is very important because it's a small step, but it's not insignificant in terms of our output. So there's always learning to go backwards and forwards. Obviously, and often they're very sensible business things. If you use less energy, you save money. So, we never used to turn the coffee machines off at night because we were fearful when you turned it back on again, they wouldn't work. Right? Things like that. So now we've found a maintenance regime that does let us do that. Lighting, LED lights, rather than all the little things. But collectively, I think it makes us more sensitive to where we can both do the right thing for the environment, but also do the right thing for the business. They're very rarely in opposition. In my experience.
So I think we're coming to the end of the podcast, but I'll ask you quickly these questions because they're very important. You think hospitality is one industry which AI can't touch?
No, I don't. I think it can, and it will, and it is already, but less so front of house, as it were. Less so customer touching, much more back of house. So labor scheduling. So one of the biggest drivers of running a profitable cafe or restaurant and not particularly busy is actually the labor hours. So AI can be really helpful in doing the algorithms and planning to get the optimum number of hours based on how many customers, based on the weather patterns, based on you can basically import all the different events. It knows there's going to be a big fair in the centre of the Leeds City Square on Sunday, and therefore there'll be more coffees. All of that kind of modulation is really going to be hugely AI enabled. It's interesting if you look, I work with my other non-exec world it's a big hospitality group, has hotels and restaurants, has about 40 KFCs, and in KFC they have concluded that if customers buy on a self-service pod rather than face-to-face, then they definitely spend more because you're able to serve up tempting offers in a much more consistent way. And therefore part of that is understanding the customer, which again it becomes AI enabled, and the weather, and if it's really cold outside, if I show you a hot chocolate melting fudge cake or something, then you're more likely to buy it. And if it's really cold out, if it's really hot, you want something cool. So there's all of that tech, which often is essentially a derivative of AI or some AI tool, is really, really powerful. In the hotel space, one of the most interesting things I saw recently is that we're trialing in the Splendid Hospitality Group is that when customers come onto the website, right, to book, traditionally you set up the revenue management kind of offers that you're going to run for that particular period. So it's not like it's without thought. You think, well, it's obviously Christmas, therefore I won't discount as much as in January when I got to just. But now, thanks again to AI, you're able to scrape the web. So if you come onto the website, we can scrape your profile and see the kind of things that you like and what we know about you.
Yeah.
And obviously, being a very affluent podcast leader, that we're not going to serve you a discount. We're going to serve you an upgrade.
Yeah.
So if you like, you adapt the offer to the profile of the consumer, and thereby maximize your yield. Which I think is really clever. So if you know the person basically is all about looking for discount, then serve them a discount. If the person's all about looking for value add, maybe a chance to get, have an extra meal for free or use the spa, whatever the offer is, that again is very AI enabled. So I think AI is for everything actually is going to be super influential and very positive in many respects.
Data, basically.
But basically, the manipulation of data and customer insight so that you can be more targeted in what you do and in managing the back of house.
Very, very, very insightful. I had no idea about this. But coming to, you've led some of the most demanding UK businesses. So has family kept you grounded through that?
Yeah. Well, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we've got 4 kids and we've got...
They're all like adults now, so in their 20s. But yeah, it's been a pretty fun ride, I suppose you'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good turn. It is about a grounding. I think it's quite challenging too, because I think I always say to people, when I'm mentoring them different levels of their career, you can get the worst bit is that it's very, I think, more acute. I think but there's many benefits of contemporary society, particularly paternity leave, not just maternity leave, and all the rest of it. But there's also this kind of working assumption that in a couple that somehow everything is shared out and everything has to be equal. And I think the reality is, the great thing about today, I was actually watching my eldest discuss this with his partner, is that they both have really big careers. Big careers. I mean, they're the early 70s. They on a trajectory to have big careers. And I think that the great choice is to, in my generation, my wife had a really good job in the city when we went to Rome with British Airways. It seemed almost automatically that she had to give up her job whilst I did my career. I can see in their situation that it could be either of them.
Yeah.
I think actually having a parent at home for a young child is really important, but I don't think it has to be the necessarily the woman. I think it could be either of the spouses. So I think there's a lot of evolution in that. And so I was lucky because Tanya was committed to the family and we did a lot of traveling. So she didn't really pick up her career in the way she did before when she raised the 4 kids and just various other things, charity work and stuff. But I think so I think they have kept me grounded, but it's mainly for my wife's sacrifice and being dedicated. And what I try to do, which is another maybe useful tip for the future of the guys, is somebody told me this and I just copied them, is that you get very guilty about being away, and missing bath time and all of that kind of stuff. And this guy said to me, don't worry, he said, as soon as you can, maybe from the age of 8, take them away individually for a night away with dad or weekend away. So we started to do that when they were quite young, which of course in the old days was very simple. We were living in Paris at the time, so you might just go from our little flat to stay in a hotel for a night. Of course, over time, we kept doing it right way through their teens, and of course they end up going to bloody New York or something, because when you talk to them now, they don't remember that I wasn't there Monday to Thursday.
They remember those trips.
They remember those trips.
Yeah.
So there are always strategies for intervention to maintain the relationship.
Yeah.
And I do think it's really important to have them, whatever works for you, but not to get yourself overstressed and over guiltified, if that's not even a word, but you know what I mean? I think I do a lot of young people get very worried that they're not going to be, and I say to them often, we've got a great posting for you to go and live in Rome, or go and live in wherever, Karachi or something, and they think, well, we have to discuss it with my partner, it's really bad, and the kids are about to go to primary school, and I do say, what? Are you mad? Doesn't matter. Get them out.
Yeah.
It only matters when they're about to do their GCSEs.
Yeah.
Take the opportunities, travel, live overseas, because the most wonderful, way to end the podcast, the most wonderful thing about all that is the appreciation of other people and other cultures. And then one of the most frightening things about our time is that you absorb all this negativity through the news.
Yeah.
And start to think that a particular country or people are bad, and they're not. In my experience, 99.9999% of people are just great. So whether you're sitting in, back streets of Tehran, if you get there in a new world, whatever, it's just amazing in my experience. And I think that's why travel and openness to other cultures and experiences is great for the soul. It's great for your wider family, and it's also great for business.
Yeah, so that's a tip for all the new fathers out there. So looking at all your best hires, what do you think, what trait do they have in common?
And that's interesting. It's the subject of another whole podcast, really, but I have narrowed it down to a model. So what you tend to find yourself doing anyway, my early career, is someone gives you a CV and you just go through you interview somebody, go through the CV, and you basically just almost like fact checking, really, or you say things like, talk to me about an experience when you had something went wrong and how you recovered. It's a very sort of somewhat trite, and there's nothing wrong necessarily with those questions, but I recognize that the inconvenient truth is that for people to be successful in certainly a management role and above, they need to have three traits. And unfortunately, they need to have evidence of all three. They might be stronger in one or two of them, but they have to have all three. And those three traits are intellect, empathy, and energy. And what I mean by that, intellect, I think is pretty obvious. Unfortunately, modern work, I know not just business, but pretty much any role, including in the public sector or not for profit, you're juggling multiple things, you're juggling multiple responsibilities, particularly in a management position. You think about all the people who are trying to run, hospitals and the NHS, that's really high pressured work. You need to have an intellectual sort of strength to look at the problems, cope with all those different things. So I think and you need therefore look for evidence of that in your interview, or their background, and they went to Leeds University, whatever. You need to find the intellectual competence. Often though, you can get people who are really, really bright, but don't have any or very limited empathy. So that tends to be that kind of classic bull in a china shop. They can really piss off everybody else in the room. Yeah. So you have to really probe, and that's very difficult to probe empathy, because people can say the right thing in an interview. You really got to get underneath it. I've had a lot of time interviewing around empathy, and obviously you can take references and stuff, but you can get quite a lot from somebody if you really get to know them in an interview. And then instantly, the third one, the energy is resilience, because you can be really smart and you can be really lovely, but if you're not very resilient. And resilience is really difficult in contemporary society, because there's a kind of an expectation that there's a reluctance to sort of say, I'm going to have several days in the year when I feel really shit, right? I'm going to feel low. I'm going to be depressed. It doesn't mean I've got a mental health issue. It just means that I'm normal, right? But I feel, again, when I talk to young people, particularly, it's a kind of like a anxiety that comes from the fact that they're feeling bad, and you can almost like sort of diagnostic sort of pattern. So you've got to find people who've got a level of resilience and openness to understand that it's going to be tough, and they're going to push through. They're going to talk to other people. That's where the empathy comes in. The best thing to do when you're feeling, as you know, when you're feeling really rough, is to try and engage with others, or music or whatever. And so I think I just tend to use that model. I just try and look for intellect, empathy, and energy, and tick it off. And generally speaking, if you find it, people are very successful.
Intellect, empathy, and energy. Lovely. So one last question for this podcast. What is the best advice you've got, or you want to give an advice out there to UG, PG, early working professionals, anybody who's listening to the podcast? You can look at the camera if you want.
I think the most important, I sort of went there a few minutes ago with this sort of optimistic view. I think, with often the deaf people define leadership as essentially purveyors of hope. As a leader, you're a purveyor of hope. Your job is to lift people and give them optimism for the future. And that can be in many ways, not just what you say, it's the different events you organize, it's a different sort of way you interact. But I think it is about that. Is because actually, when I did a talk, I think it was here actually, I put a slide up at the beginning of the talk or the Q&A, and it said that this is a statement, and it said, I live at the best time in world history, with more opportunities to live a happy and fulfilled life than at any other time. And I asked the guys to vote whether they agreed or disagreed with that statement.
And what did they do?
And when we started the Q&A, I reckon, I can't remember, I might remember, but it was maybe about 85% didn't agree.
Okay.
Right? And I'm pleased to say we did it again at the end of the Q&A, and it flipped on its head.
Wow.
And because I think that is the role for my generation of leadership, because the thing is, that statement is true, right? I mean, I know it doesn't feel like it when you look at the headline, but it is true. You're going to live longer. There's more opportunities to travel. There's more opportunities to do amazing things. There's going to be more leisure time. There's going to be all kinds of, positive things. But of course, there are our own set of challenges at this time as well. The difference is, I think it was easier to escape the challenges that existed when I was like 20 than it is now when my kids are in their 20s.
Yeah.
Because they're much more omnipresent through social and any other platform. So the developing the art of, particularly as many of the guys listening will end up in some form of management career, be it in the technical space or the service space. You have to sort of really work around that, find the strategies that help you to just find that sense of joy, that sense of optimism. Generally, I think it often comes through helping other people. I mean, it isn't a surprise that when you do things for other people, you kind of feel better. And actually recognizing that focusing on your own personal sort of self-satisfaction rarely leads to any long-term sense of joy and happiness.
Right.
It leads to sort of self-doubt, in my experience. You think, oh God, I've lost my hair now. I think, although you can get all these sort of silly things. Whereas when you focus on other people, you tend to be much more kind of, I think, optimistic naturally. Yeah. But also don't be too hard on yourselves, because that is a statement of fact. The reality doesn't really feel like it. So it's just a question of just accepting that and going with the flow a little bit, but trying to reorientate yourself onto that sort of positive path, because ultimately that's where fulfillment comes.
All right. Absolutely golden advice. And I'd just like to thank Will for his time and for his insightful. He gave a lot about traits. He spoke a lot of his advice regarding, go easy on yourself, go with the flow as well, and don't be too hard on yourself. So thank you, Will, for being here. Thank you for a very insightful session. And to all our viewers, thank you for tuning in. You can follow us on Instagram. The page is called Mind the Business Gap. Please subscribe on YouTube. Please listen to us on Spotify. This is absolutely golden advice. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.